Medicare for all is absolutely necessary as far as I'm concerned, just broadly speaking. But I don't know that something specific to COVID, short of the fact that I think people are losing their health insurance because of employment. I mean,
right. But short of that fact, that's a pretty big fact, Sam. 15 million newly uninsured Americans is a huge deal. And the only reason I believe it's not really being felt that way in terms of media coverage is because the media isn't covering it as such. And so my point with Force the Vote is not, of course, Sam, nobody here thinks that next week, 2 weeks, a month, even a year after a Force the Vote effort, that we're going to have Medicare for all.
2 years.
And nobody.
What do you imagine the vote count will? Just articulate to me. What do you imagine the vote count will be?
I'm trying in this moment to articulate to you what the goal of Force the Vote was, because it was never about
getting Medicare.
No, it was not about passing Medicare for all. Because here's the issue, Sam. If your argument is we should only do things if they guarantee a win in this moment. That's not my
argument at all.
Okay, well then you can make your argument. But my point is that if that is the way someone saw the world, of course you wouldn't believe in Medicare for all.
That's not
you wouldn't believe in Force the Vote, rather. But if you had a longer historical perspective and understood that, for example, when in the lead up to women's suffrage, they did this exact same thing. They forced a vote that failed, but which galvanized a lot more public attention to the need for women's suffrage. And subsequently, about a year later, they were able, because of that upswell of energy and intention, to attend to it. So what you said earlier was that it will make people rise up. And
did that happen in 2017?
That felt a little flippant. Well, here, let's take your point about the 2017 vote. One of the arguments being made by the anti-Force the Vote crowd is that if we do this, we'll lose political will and it will set back the case for Medicare for all. But by your own admission, they did this in 2017 and subsequently got more co-sponsors for Medicare for all than we've ever had in American history. So the argument that somehow this is going to cost us politically, I think, is really unfounded. Now, I can't prove to you it's going to cost us
make that argument.
But Sam, let me just finish this, since I let you finish as well. I can't promise you any outcome. But in light of how limited the potential costs are, the idea that you wouldn't take this opportunity to withhold the vote to maximize what you can get, whether or not it's a floor vote on Medicare for all, whether it's PAYGO exemptions, whether or not it's getting rid of Richard Neal as the head of the Ways and Means Committee, or any number of the suggestions given by David Sirota, what we saw is that the vote was never held, and instead a bunch of concessions that who knows what the negotiations were like behind the scenes that ultimately didn't add up to much were held out as some big get in a way that felt really disingenuous. And I think that that's why so many people on the left find there to be a credibility crisis. It's not that they hate AOC or hate the squad or want to throw anybody away, but they want to hear a better response, an acknowledgement about why it seems like they sold this enormously important progressive issue for so cheap.
Well, first off, I think the conflation between the idea that forcing a losing vote, which I think we can all agree, right? I mean, I'm not saying anything wrong that you disagree with. 325, 125.
No one
right.
believed.
No vote in the Senate.
Never that was going to.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're on the same page with this.
Yeah.
The idea that people are conflating
What's going on, Sim Daddy?
A pursuit of Medicare for all with this particular tactic is wrong. Now, if you want to talk about other things that could have been leveraged, I mean, look.
We were talking about them. We continue to talk about them.
I'm willing to I think you have an argument that maybe it would have been better not to get PAYGO. Maybe it would be better to get this. But let's play this scenario out. You say there is nothing to lose in this strategy whatsoever. I can tell you that the fact that AOC has led the challenging, I mean, presumably I've heard, and maybe this is wrong, the idea is that the people who vote against Medicare for all, and I don't think we have a president who was elected by saying that even if the House and the Senate were to pass Medicare for all, he will veto it. So we have a disagreement as to what we think the public is going to react to at this point and how they'll react. Okay, fine. My sense is that losing vote would not galvanize the population. You would not get
a lot of tweeted out then, hey,
you would not get that type of push. that you got with suffrage, for instance.
Why not?
Well, so that's the central point then. That's the central disagreement because, as you said earlier, Sam, surely we all agree that under this Congress, that as it's currently constituted, as we know what individual members of Congress are on the record about Medicare for All, they will not pass it. But the idea is that a failing vote and, as Bria is saying, the momentum created by that, the media attention created by that, the starkness of it would push the matter.
So I think it comes down to, I'm interjecting real quick because I just want to put in my 2 cents. I think what it comes down to is who is going to have the political pull to be able to persuade the public to either get on board and continue to double down on this pressure, or to force the vote, or who is going to be relegated to a position where Medicare for All is not a feasible option right now, and that it's best to take what we can get, and that would be, at best, a public option tied to or in parts of ACA. You can pause the stream. It's live. I guess I could do that too. So I think that's what it comes down to. I think it's the old guard versus the new guard of the Democratic Party, and who will win in their information campaign as to whether or not we can build momentum for Medicare for All. And how will this transcend into either a legislative win or a legislative fail, right? Depending on the apportionment of the pressure tied to each individual Democratic congressperson, and whether or not they will break away ties to the establishments, break away ties to any possible political suicide that could be the results of fighting for Medicare for All in their active position, if that could ultimately make them less favorable to the powers that be, if they are planning to continue to climb the ranks and game the system of a superiority that is built within the Congress, requiring you to earn your keep as a loyal member to both the establishment as well as the overarching national democratic agenda. Right? And I think it's a matter of functionality and how it can be best strategized behind the scene, how we can continue to build momentum on the ground, pressure those to fight for Medicare for All instead of towing the line for the Democratic Party. I think that's essentially what it comes down to. And I think we're fighting over the mechanics of how we should push for Medicare for All, and we're thinking whether or not it will even amount to a win. That's what's obviously a contentious point as well. But how do we go about just raising awareness and building discussions and pushing for the initiation of fighting for Medicare for All, making it so popular that there is no way to not bring it to the House floor? Now, I know that a lot of those arguing against force the vote are in and of itself is in and of itself a concession to those who wield more power in Congress than those who don't. Those who wield more power tend to not push for Medicare for All. Those who don't could be spearheading this conversation as to why we need Medicare for All. Who wins, I think, is where we get stuck. And how do we overcome those obstacles is what we should be discussing.
And that
But wait a second, Bri. You asked what the cost is? The cost is that.
No.
The cost is
No, I didn't ask you.
And I'll tell you something. I have historical perspective on this. We have, for the first time, we have taken out more establishment Democrats in the past 2 years not exclusively because of her, obviously in Justice Democrats, but
I really just
almost-
wanted to make the point that I was making, though, which
Okay, go
wasn't
ahead,
about
no.
any of that. And I would like to say my name is Briahna Joy Gray, not Jimmy Dore. So I would think we should talk about and can
Well, we're
talk
talking about force the vote,
Okay.
and there's
But
the
if I can just
first
finish the
name that
sentence,
is
Sam,
listed.
if I can finish the sentence, I think that we can and should talk about the effect of the approach that Jimmy Dore took. But in this statement that I'm making right now, what I'm trying to say is the argument that was being made is not that you have all the control in the world, but there was an enormous resistance that I'm not saying coordinated as though it was planned, but all the big players were either silent on the issue or were anti-force the vote for whatever reason, okay? And what that does ultimately is take what could be a spiral of energy and natural enthusiasm that came up around the idea and deflate it. So you can't be suppressing an idea, which you can agree with suppressing the idea. It's your right, it's your show, it's your platform. But the DSA declined to weigh in.
Not Trout, thank you
I'm
for
not the
resubscribing
DSA.
7 months in a
That's
row.
fine, but the DSA declined to weigh in. The nurses union declined to weigh in. Young Turks was antagonistic to it as an institution, even though 80% of its viewership supported the idea, and you did too. So it feels a little unfair to say nobody showed up, and not you, but other people were mocking that idea after having worked so hard to stem the natural organic tide of enthusiasm around it.
Okay, well, I mean, it is impossible to separate Jimmy from this. You said yourself, you heard about it from me, which I got it from Jimmy. Jimmy is the first name outside of Nancy Pelosi's on the forcethevote.org. For a long time, there was two supporting agents, and the first one was Jimmy Dore's logo down there. Jimmy Dore turned this into a litmus test for progressives as to whether they were actually on our side. And you asked about the cost. And when it became clear to me that this was going to cost a lot more, like I say, I was open to the idea from a perspective of 1,000 flowers bloom. I didn't necessarily think it was the greatest thing in the world. I thought maybe there were other asks that you could get. But as soon as he took the energy, and it was all emanating from him and around him, he was on every one of those conversations. You mentioned Sirota and conversations that you had. He was in I didn't see all of them, but all the ones that I did see, he was there. Whether it was 5 or 6 other people, he was there dominating the conversations. And this turned into a project for him. And it was, I don't know on that Slack that I saw the images on that Slack. I don't know how representative that was, but it at the very least captured what I found to be problematic of it. And I thought that was the cost, because from my perspective, having had my historical context, I have watched for 15, 20 years an inability to primary Democrats who are establishment Democrats or conservative Democrats. Donna Edwards, I think, was the last one that we saw, and that was in 2006 maybe, and that was a big deal. And I don't even think she was that far to the left, frankly, relative to where people are today. and yet, the central figure, and if you go back and you look at too, like things like, if you look at the reporting on the Energy and Commerce Committee that AOC was shut out of because she was doing that primary. Had that, I think there was a couple of articles that made the point that had that vote been public, they would have been very nervous about voting against her. And that means that the value and the power that she has to do with her Twitter following, her capacity to raise money, her popularity on the left, and to go after that and fundamentally undercut that. And if I have power, Jimmy Dore has more power. And to undercut that and for the sake of a losing vote where supposedly it was about 2 years later, you're going to primary those people, although she is the central figure who are helping primary those figures. It did not make sense to me. That was the cost. As far as arguing whether, and that was the cost of the force the vote movement. Whether there was a cost for the Progressive Caucus or those 15 people to vote against Nancy Pelosi, I also have an argument. I don't know if I buy it, but I mean, I'm not a sitting congressperson, but let's say Nancy Pelosi says, fine, don't vote for me. They lose the speakership, right? Because there's no one going to coalesce around. You're not going to get that 218 people to coalesce around another vote person, it's going to end up being McCarthy, because
that's
No,
just not
that's
true,
not
Sam.
true.
That's just fundamentally
I mean,
not true.
walk through this.
And that's argument is in bad faith. We've been
I'm
talking
going to
about
give
this
you
for
my
months
scenario
now.
about this. I'm going to give you my scenario. They say, no, we're not going to vote for Nancy Pelosi. We're going to vote for Hakeem Jeffries.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. And if you got, what was the 218 to 212 or something, right? What I can't remember.
I believe it was 216 to 212 with majority of 215, because if memory serves, 429 votes were cast, requiring a majority of 215.
So you
Democrats
now need,
had at the time, I believe, about 219.
It seems really counterproductive to be arguing this very point, though, honestly. But I understand that it's crucial to what Force the Vote was calling
for. The majority is not the majority of people who are voting. It's the majority of people who vote for a named candidate, right? You know this.
Yes.
So I'm thinking, okay, so let's say Nancy Pelosi calls their bluff.
Force the hula?
And they vote for Hakeem Jeffries. It goes into, enough of only like 4 of them vote for Hakeem Jeffries, so that there is no majority. They have to revote, right? Yeah. And then what happens? They have the same vote that they had before, or they switch to Pelosi, or they maybe other people vote for Hakeem Jeffries.
So
but
it goes to a second ballot.
It goes to a second or third or fourth or
round.
Wait a second. Round of voting.
Second round. Now you have 15 people who vote for Hakeem Jeffries, 215 who vote for McCarthy, and 205 who vote for Nancy Pelosi. What happens then, Virgil?
Wait, hang on. Why would the if memory serves, McCarthy got 212 votes? So you're not saying that number goes up?
No, I'm suggesting in round two, one of two
nobody
things
can marshal. Nobody can marshal a majority, so it goes to round 3.
No. You don't need you need a plurality of names.
That's not true.
It would require Democrats would have to vote for Kevin McCarthy to be Speaker. Or a large number would have to abstain altogether.
Yes, or abstain. Under your scenario, Sam, you need a majority of the people voting for a name.
Okay, so let's
say not voting president, which means
not voting
that if every single Democrat shows up and they vote for someone, then unless they have a majority within that caucus, I'll say it's not a majority, and this is again assuming the Republicans voted as a bloc.
The dynamic dreamer, the reason why this is all an issue is because those who are opposed to Force the Vote are making a concession that those progressive caucus members in the Democratic Party do not have enough weight
a situation we've not had
in numbers to be able to wield their power and go up against those who are more
Virgil is nodding to. And this is where we start to talk about media
who have a little bit more capital at their disposal, who will counter any efforts to hashtag Force the Vote that could ultimately lead to even more contention in the House.
So the question is, isn't this part of the spectacle that we're trying to create around the issue?
Yeah, that's my point. Got it.
50 million people just lost their health insurance, and what the government is going to do about it in this moment. So we don't end up in a situation where Joe Biden is saying, let's do more COBRA payments.
Virgil, Texas have a landline?
The private insurance industry. And even if it doesn't result, obviously, in Medicare for All tomorrow, what it does is finally has the best chance of forcing a conversation on this issue that I can imagine happening at all. So unless we give an alternative of how we're going to force
the subsequent things that followed that vote probably would have sucked up a lot of that attention. You didn't know that, of course. You didn't know that, of course, before the
Nancy is incredibly unpopular nationwide. AOC is way more popular than Nancy Pelosi.
To the insurrection in the
Nancy
Capitol.
Pelosi is just popular in her district.
Know how things are going to play out. And
they could have scheduled the hearings for any time also.
I'm saying the spectacle that would have come from that vote on the 4th would have ended, of course, on the 6th. And
sure, but again, we didn't know that at the time. You couldn't know that at all.
No, of course. I mean, and then you also would have held up the vote for I guess to certify the vote, right? I mean, how would we do that?
Wait, your question is, how do we certify the vote because there was a job that we didn't know?
I think Virgil's booties are here.
I'm saying in terms of we haven't organized, we don't have a Speaker of the House yet at that point. But my point is like the sureness that the force of the vote people had, enough so that the Progressive Caucus members who didn't do what they said were sellouts. To me, I'm sorry. I just think that's ludicrous.
Okay, so
like
let me ask you this.
I never even criticized the force the vote until it became apparent to me it was part of Jimmy's sort of project, to attack the Democrats and particularly the progressives. I mean, he did that when she was elected before she even won the general election. He attacked AOC for endorsing Andrew Cuomo in the general election. I mean, then I realized I'd been duped.
My name's Briahna, and regardless, Jimmy Dore could go and kill 15.
You brought up the DSA, you brought up nurses, you brought up the media, you brought up David Sirota.
Honestly, Sam, if I could just get this sentence out, we can talk about Jimmy Dore can go and kill 15 kids tomorrow, and I still believe in force the vote. So there are ways that I think we can talk about the effect of Jimmy Dore's argumentative style on this discourse.
Well, it's not an argumentative style.
Okay.
I don't mind his style. I think that when you put out and make the argument over and over again that she's a sellout and they're a fraud, I think that does damage.
We can and we should talk about that, but that's different than making an argument for why force the vote is good or bad. And
if you're asking why I didn't support it, that's why. Because I didn't want to associate myself with a attack.
Okay, so that's honest. That's honest.
Oh, yeah.
So you're not saying that you actually think that force the vote was an effective strategy or a bad idea. You didn't like that it was associated with Jimmy Dore.
I thought, like I've said this 3 times on this, and I thought it was a middling idea. When I found out that they were leveraging other stuff that I thought had more material benefit and not.
But it doesn't have more material benefit. Because they could have asked at least for you to get rid of all
You and I have a disagreement. I believe that exempting PAYGO.
But they didn't exempt PAYGO.
Excuse me. At a time where we desperately need funding, we need expansion on all sorts of things, ranging from expanded unemployment insurance. We need checks. All of that. I think that was a valuable get.
It was valuable, but it wasn't a get.
Huh?
It was valuable, but it wasn't a get. You have no knowledge if their failure to force the vote resulted in getting those things, if those things were already planned concessions or not. Moreover, part of my demand was to get rid of PAYGO entirely. So if we're talking about the material value of either of those things.
Yes, your demand was you. Look, I'm saying there is an argument, okay? But neither one of us knows how much you could have leveraged at this point.
Well, here's
you want to argue that you think that their negotiations, that their ask wasn't big enough? Fine. I don't have a big issue.
That is what I'm arguing. Here's why.
But as to why I wanted to distance myself as fast as I could, because I'm not going to be part of a project that disempowers for what I think is a highly speculative tactic that I think is dubious, frankly. But again, I was perfectly willing to just let 1,000 flowers bloom. Like you said, there was no strategy on my part to go like, I'm going to support this so that Bree signs on to it, for instance, and then I'm going to pull the rug out. No, it was and to say that Jimmy's not associated with force the vote.
I didn't say that Jimmy's not associated with force the vote.
To say that he wasn't the biggest advocate or the person most close to
associated. He's very central to it. It was his idea.
That is why when he started to use it as a leverage to disempower the progressives in Congress, I decided I'm done.
So I'd like to address that point, if I may. I don't believe that Jimmy is trying to disempower the progressives in Congress. What I believe Jimmy is doing, whether or not you agree with him or the tactic he's using, is trying to use his platform to pressure the elected officials, the progressives that we have worked so hard and have this unprecedented number, to your point, in Congress, to do the thing that we want them to do, which is to use power when it falls in their lap. Now, in this instance, we didn't need to get a majority of progressives in Congress to enact the plan. That was the whole spark and magic of it. That with a very small number of people.
Well, let's take that first premise, though. Take the first premise that you made, the assertion that you don't think Jimmy's agenda is to disempower progressives.
Sam, I'm sorry. Which way is this going to go? I feel like I'm in the middle of a point. I feel like I've been letting you.
Okay, go.
If I could just finish this point. I have like a whole notepad of notes that I'm trying to catch up on from the various issues that you brought up that I think are important to address. Jimmy's perspective, if I don't want to speak for him, but it seems obvious to me what he's doing, is to be the farthest, angriest version of the left, to create political pressure on progressives to do what they said they were going to do when they ran for office. One of those, AOC in particular, since she's come under focus, said that she wanted to oust Pelosi. She complained just this past January, a year ago now, that it was regrettable that the Democratic Party was so moderate, so to the right, that we couldn't even get a floor vote on Medicare for all. That's almost a direct quote. So what Jimmy's trying to do is say, I don't care about AOC per se. I don't care about the squad per se. I'm invested in these individuals in so far as that they're advancing the interests of the progressive movement and are fighting tooth and nail for the policies that caused us to support them in the first place. And he is willing to become the antagonist in that by being the most ferocious attack dog to push them where they need to go. If AOC were to say, hey, this is my plan for Medicare for all, and demonstrate a fighting spirit, there's no one in this world, I think, who would imagine that Jimmy Dore would just randomly keep antagonizing her for no reason. No, doesn't have a vendetta out against AOC. Whether or not I think that his approach is most useful is a different question. But he doesn't have a vendetta out against AOC because he hates her or something. It's because he simply wants her to conform with her own campaign promises. So I want to put to you, Sam, what is the point of having these people in Congress if, when they have real power to leverage, they decline to do it?
I disagree with your assessment of
I think that the point that is being made right now is excusing Jimmy Dore's outrageous, sensationalist attempts to be the bad guy, the loud guy, who was going to say all of the things that nobody is willing to say because they don't want to seem as though they are not incredibly grateful for the work that the squad is committed to do. That Jimmy Dore will be the person to unapologetically say, hey, the squad ran on campaigns, included Medicare for all in their campaign promises. Why are they not putting their money where their mouth is? Why are they not doubling down and finding a way to use their power that they have, even though in numbers it is smaller than the power that Nancy Pelosi has the capability to drum up, seeing as though she is the Speaker of the House, right? And I do think that Jimmy Dore's entire point was to focus more so on what he believed to be the empty promises of the members of the squad and push them and pressure them to use their time, even though it's not necessarily a winning strategy, to make as much noise as Jimmy Dore was willing to make as an outsider, not beholden to any Washington apparatus power structure, but kind of leading the charge to apply a newfound pressure to the squad to see if that would somehow have more pull than maybe the pull that is leading them to subvert themselves in their overall agenda of pushing for a Medicare vote under any circumstances necessary, under any means necessary, right?
going to all
Raiders,
side with her
hi.
and against these enormously popular group of
No
people
comment,
like
Chick. Thank you so much for the raid. Hi, Raiders. How are you doing? We're just watching the push the force of the vote debate right now. Thank you so much, Irene, for the raid. I really appreciate it. I hope you had a fantastic stream, and welcome, Raiders. Get cozy.
Because they're preventing Nancy Pelosi from seating. I think that is, I think that's fantastical.
Okay, well, we have a very, very different.
We have a disagreement on that.
Of what it means for 75% of people
but
to
since
hate.
you started that with what Jimmy Dore's intentions are, okay, I'm sorry. The fact of the matter is that AOC, as a freshman Congress person, her strength comes from the fact that she is one of the biggest fundraisers in Congress. She does it all from small donations.
From us, yeah.
Exactly. And I think, I don't know what Jimmy Dore's intentions are. Maybe you do. I have watched Jimmy Dore for many years now, and I do remember when he attacked AOC as a sellout for, in the general election, supporting Andrew Cuomo. I don't know what motivates him, but I can tell you what the impact was. And the impact is that, Fraud Squad went out there, and when AOC did not get that seat on the Energy and Commerce Committee, which is a crucial committee if you want to talk about Medicare for all,
Absolutely.
there was no pushback whatsoever. There was no, and so we didn't have her back there. And in other words, basically,
why did we have her back there, Sam?
They were able to disempower us by not giving us a voice on that committee, and they got no pushback from it.
AOC, the fact that AOC is reliant on her base for her power is a reason why AOC should listen to her base and not Nancy Pelosi. You have
I'm not convinced that the base is so big. You have 41,000 people who signed that petition.
Well, which is it, Sam?
There was 100 people out there.
You can't have it both ways. Is it that force the vote made it so that no one had AOC's back when she was denied the energy and commerce position? Or is it that AOC's base is still with her and Jimmy Dore's base is not to have impact?
Far sexier story for the media was about, the fraud squad hashtag.
First of all, the media barely covered that to begin with. The lefty media was interested, the internet was interested, but as with most things, it takes a big splash. It takes AOC herself to draw attention to the issue, which, by the way, the only reason, I want to be clear about this, the only reason we're talking about AOC and why she's such a focus of this is because she inserted herself into this conversation in the thread with Justin Jackson. So I think there's been a lot of bad faith discourse about the focus on AOC. I do think there is now at this point some undue focus on her. It's all of them together. And I think that she's taking the heat for the inaction of a lot of other squad members who should also be in focus right now, and people who are progressives but not in the squad. But
right now we should be rallying about getting Katie Porter a waiver so that she can sit on the Financial Services Committee.
That could have been one of the demands if they had decided to force the vote. They could have actually demanded specific committee positions, but they gave them their power.
That would have been a better maybe thing to ask for. I don't know.
Well, Sam, I don't know what you were asking for, but part of the Force the Vote campaign I was a part of explicitly said that we were going to ask for committee seats.
Well, that same thing that you were part of was basically saying fraud squad, and I wanted nothing to do with that.
Sam, the fraud squad hashtag didn't even emerge until after the vote came out. So I'm not really sure.
I'm sorry. Listen. It's the only time I came out publicly, the first time I came out publicly with any negativity associated with that was when Jimmy Dore did that video. You know what I'm talking about.
I don't know what you're talking about. I know the fraud squad trended the day of the vote.
In terms of his agenda, one of the things that came out on that Slack, as you know, was that there was a lot of people.
I don't know anything about anything. I'm not a part of the Slack. The Slack I'm a part of is the DSA Slack. I logged into and I had a bunch of people making fun of me as well. But I didn't use that to condemn the entire DSA.
I want to know what the video. I would like to know what the video is and what Sam has to say.
On the Slack channel, apparently somebody leaked some things, and there was a lot of people on there who were saying this is important for the movement for a People's Party to show that to make it out as if the progressives in the Democratic caucus are useless, and there is no reason for a progressive party, for a People's Party, if they're effective. And I'm
not true. What the Slack said
I thought you didn't see the Slack.
No, No, I saw the clip. I don't have firsthand knowledge of the Slack because I'm not in the Slack. So when you said, as you well know, I thought you were implying that I was a part of that Slack conversation.
No, I didn't. I'm not part of the Slack either. I just saw those.
Well, pardon me, but the screen grab that was circulated by Ryan Grimm on Twitter said that if the squad doesn't do this, if the squad doesn't use their power, it's a demonstration of why we need third parties. And we can use this moment to demonstrate why we need an outside pressure from someone like the People's Party, because people who are a part of the Democratic Party are obviously unwilling or unable to flex the kind of muscle that we need to move the progressive movement forward. Now, you can frame that as, oh, I'm trying to kill the squad so that we can get FP.
Well, I think that's very consistent with what Jimmy's been doing. He's been pushing for a third party for the past 6 years. And so, I mean, first it was the Green Party, and then it was, and frankly, again, I remember what Jimmy's prescription was. People can go and look at the debate that I had with Jimmy Dore in 2016, where he told me that Donald Trump was going to get nothing done and it would bring us Elizabeth Warren. That was his argument. Plus, he didn't know what a filibuster was. And if we're talking about, I mean, you made some assertions about what Jimmy's intentions are. This is my understanding of Jimmy's intentions are in this context. And frankly, honestly, I felt like I got completely duped and did not, when I actually was, took Jimmy's first video and proposal for this, I was far more, I was naive about thinking that I should have known. And I have to say that I felt deep regret about that because I was duped. And I realized, and I don't know, he wasn't trying to dupe people. I think it's just in his nature. And it turned into something that became extremely corrosive as far as I'm concerned. And it undercut what little power I think progressives have in the Democratic Party.
So you agree that progressives had the power to hold up the vote?
Yeah, everybody had the power to hold up the vote.
So do you think that do you also agree that they should have held up the vote in exchange for something more, whether it's committee appointments or elimination of PAYGO?
I mean, I don't know if frankly, I don't know how if you could organize people around the idea that this one person should get on a committee or not. I mean, I'm not in Congress. What do
you mean organize people around?
Well, I mean, you need to get 5 or 6 or whatever, 10 people to vote as a block. Mm-hmm. And I'm not convinced that there could be something they could settle on that would work across, all of their agendas to do that, because it comes at some price. I mean, you say it doesn't, but the reason why AOC lost that vote for the Energy and Commerce Committee is because she was leading the charge to primary other sitting Democrats, and they don't like that.
And yet a woman who, I'm sorry, I forget her name, the moderate who ended up withholding the vote this time ended up getting a seat on that committee.
Voted against Pelosi last time and lost a seat on the judiciary that she wanted. Right. This time around, it was reported by Politico before that she had been quiet about not voting for Pelosi.
Right. So there's
did Connor Lamb suffer any repercussions for not voting for Nancy Pelosi or any of the other, I believe, 5 members of the right side of the Democratic caucus?
Did they suffer any? I
don't know offhand.
I don't know either.
Yeah. So there's a lot of assumptions being made about why any of this happened. But what is assured, what we know for certain, is that until 4 or 5 members of the Progressive Caucus, the squad, whatever you want to call it, agreed to vote for Nancy Pelosi, there's no way that Nancy Pelosi could become Speaker of the House. And my main crucial point, and I think that what really can't be ignored, and what really got lost in a lot of this discourse, because people weren't arguing the merits of this in good faith, they were arguing about Jimmy Dore, and I think there's a lot you can. I
think that I've been
very entitled to your feelings about Jimmy Dore, but the reality is there was a moment where we could have.
That when I argue that I don't want to be part of this because he's using this as some type of litmus test, that is actually a good faith argument.
I think that you're being honest about that. I don't think that reflects especially well.
You can think it's a dumb perspective on politics and whatnot.
I don't not believe you.
But do you think it's a good faith argument? Because you just said that is not a good faith argument, and I just want to be clear.
No, I think that people are not arguing in good faith about them. They're conflating. I think that what you said is true and honest, but that has nothing to do with the merits of good force the vote as a tactic.
Well, as a tactic, if it existed
I'm really glad you said that, Sam, because I think that's really honest of you to admit that your opposition is because Jimmy Dore is associated with it, and you don't think that Jimmy Dore is pushing it in good faith.
It's not just that Jimmy Dore is associated with it. It's as if like it's not like it's a car exists, and whether I get into that car is going to have something to do with who's driving it.
Right, but there are a lot of others.
I'm sorry. He was driving. He was driving.
Jimmy, a lot of why Jimmy was so focused, so central to it is frankly because people like you on your show spent countless hours clipping his stuff.
That's
talking about
all
it.
That the sequencing is wrong there. He was the only person who had his logo on the petition for forcethevote.org. He's the first person still to this day.
I have a factual question here.
Yes, until after the vote. The organization came up with the logo and all of that after the vote.
Not true. Not true.
If I could make
Did you finish a YouTube script?
You've been referencing
I am obviously a tortured soul. I will continue to fine-tune all parts of my YouTube script, but I'm also trying to really hone in on the last component that needs a little bit more tweaking, and that is completing my observation/analysis on the pathology of those who are engaging in various forms of fetishization of commodities that tend to be the targeted consumer for gentrification, how this is evidenced in the overall mentality that your material wealth is a symbolic gesture determining your status, where you belong, and whenever these communities are built, and a reflection of the only American culture that we have, and that is consumerism, materialism, brand recognition. And those components are what you tend to see in a gentrified neighborhood. That is occurring after all remnants of a previous cultural identity that might be rooted in ethnic cultures, in something that does form around the identity of a collective neighborhood is washed away with new architecture, with new design styles, and the only thing that's left is homogenous, gentrified buildings, big box retailers, Starbucks. That's whenever white people know that this is for them. It is place-based. It requires no real ties to one's cultural identity because white people, specifically white people who are guilty of gentrifying or entering gentrified neighborhoods, don't necessarily feel any cultural identity to a place, but they know that they are attracted to what brings them into an urban area based on their propensity to engage in consumerism and materialism, and that being their ties to the built environments, and keeps them entering these specific areas and allows for this gentrified market to continue on, even though it is at the expense of all pre-existing residents who are then displaced without having any plan of recourse or ties to policies addressing restorative justice for those who continue to be uprooted from their own communities, because cities tend to be more focused on restoring the built environment because of the profit margins involved in promoting unfettered capitalism in the real estate market. Sorry, I just gave away half of my script. Sorta. So yeah, it's I'm now in the like cultural analysis portion of the script that I'm trying to fine tune and perfect and make it amazing.
Want a part of it. And when it became clear to me that it was a continuance of what I perceived to be Jimmy Dore's, project, and then I struck back at Jimmy Dore. I mean,
this feels like is the people who say,
I
I
guess
I like Medicare for all, and I like a lot of what Bernie's saying, but his supporters are just too aggressive, and I can't get on board.
Well, yeah, but I wasn't one of those people, and that's not my point. My point is that I think Jimmy Dore teaches people to be stupid. And I think Jimmy Dore is out there. I just watched, if we're going to get into this, I just saw a video of him talking about the Boogaloo Boys.
I'm not
without
really
having done any research on. No, but I think this is reprehensible, and I think this is really problematic. Okay, I think this is how because if my if this is perceived as being like inconsequential, I want to try and put it in context so I see it as more consequential. Okay, when there's a guy out there saying, hey, maybe we should embrace the Boogaloo Boys because this guy with a weapon is talking about taking out government, a civil war, but he also—
This guy with a weapon trying to take out government, that could be said about 1 million left-wing groups in the world.
Excuse me, but this guy's a Boogaloo Boy. This guy's
Sam, we all saw the video. You're not going to sit here on our show and misrepresent. I haven't seen the clip you're talking about, but I did see the Boogaloo Boy clip.
You should look at the clip. You should watch the clip.
So I don't want to talk about stuff that is not germane to this issue and is not being represented on the book.
You asked me why I didn't get involved, and I'm telling you.
That is fair. We are all very clear that you personally don't think that Jimmy Dore is a worthwhile vessel for this. You think that it's worth throwing away?
I think he was using it in a destructive way, and that
Jimmy Dore was using it in a destructive way, and it tainted it. So, what I'm saying, and I hear you. I think that everyone understands your point of view.
I think the argument that you're having with everybody about Jimmy Dore is proof of my that he tainted it.
I'm trying desperately, can I tell you, to stop talking about Jimmy Dore because 15 million people lost their health insurance this past year, and I can't get you to focus on that issue for more than 5 minutes.
Hey, no, because listen, I can focus on Medicare for all, but that's not the same as force the vote.
It is, Sam, because
no,
it was a
it
tactic
isn't. Only
that you admit,
in
Sam,
your mind and maybe in some minds of others, but not in my mind.
The tactic that you just admitted was a good tactic, but for Jimmy Dore, which could put us on a path.
I said the ask was not good, Bree. The ask. A losing vote for Medicare for all is not going to do what you think it's going to.
You just sat here and waxed philosophical about how important PAYGO is, and you're right. So why not ask to get rid of PAYGO entirely instead of these narrow exemptions for COVID and for the Green New Deal?
Because everything that passes in the next 2 years is going to deal with COVID, and Nancy Pelosi is done after this.
Oh my goodness!
Bree, I have a question for you. Then is if force the vote is a tactical disagreement and not a plot by Jimmy Dore, then would you accept that supporters of Medicare for all might simply have other ideas of how to get to that point that do not involve the specific tactic of withholding the vote?
Yeah, so we talked about this a lot, Virgil, and I think what a lot of people wanted to hear was what that is. So we, as you know, had Michael Lighty on the show, who was Bernie Sanders' healthcare
National
outreach director. Yeah, National Nurses. He has DSA affiliations as well. And he was very candid with us, and I really appreciated and respected his issue. And so my tempers really went up around this force the vote. Like, I got really invested when I asked the question, what's the alternative? And obviously he doesn't represent everybody, but we made a request for someone from the National Nurses Union to come on, and they declined. We have made all kinds of requests and people have declined. So Michael Lighty came on, and what he argued was that we have a 20-year-ish so window to Medicare for all, which involves state by state Medicare for all, principally starting with California, and that he believes that when Gavin Newsom makes a presidential bid, he is basically going to ride the wave of Medicare for all in California to the White House and make that a principal issue. Now, reasonable minds can disagree on that. I personally don't find that to be an adequate plan, largely because it misses the opportunity that this historical moment of enormous cataclysmic healthcare failure in the United States of America in the middle of a global pandemic, which is likely to last 2 years, it misses the opportunity to leverage that to create the kind of political pressure on our elected officials so that it is toxic for someone like Joe Biden to say he would veto Medicare for all in the middle of a pandemic. It is toxic for only 118 Democrats to be co-signers of a bill when 88% of Democratic voters and a majority of Americans support Medicare for all. Right now we have poll numbers, but it is not politically toxic to oppose Medicare for all because we have no one in the media institutions or in the political institutions who are willing to point out why it is that our elected officials don't support this popular policy. The reason being rank corruption and being bought out by the pharmaceutical and healthcare industry. And that is an argument it is very difficult to foreground, but which in this moment, in this historical moment, I think we should be fighting like the Dickens to put front and center.
But do you believe when the pandemic ends,
yeah,
that the logic for eliminating for-profit health insurance will also end?
No,
because the fight for Medicare for all obviously began before the pandemic.
Yeah.
It picked up momentum before the pandemic. It started pulling well before the pandemic. Shouldn't the fight still exist after the pandemic?
Well, and that's, I would add, Joe Biden said he would veto it during the pandemic.
Of course,
and that's not to disagree. That's to not to disagree.
No, I understand
with the point of that. Yes, this is a critical juncture, but that the fight obviously won't end.
So the point, and I'm really glad you asked that because we've talked so little about what these hearings could really look like. So part of the ask is for vote for Medicare for all, because you can demand as part of your request the hearings on Medicare for all, and you can make requests about how long those hearings are, how many days they are, what the structure of them are. All of that is exclusively within Nancy Pelosi's purview. That's why this was such an interesting tactical pressure point, because Nancy Pelosi is invested in keeping the job. She's the one that's number one invested in that, as opposed to other things that she can't grant. Like she can't make Biden push through a $15 minimum wage tomorrow. She only has what's in her procedural capacity. And structuring the hearings on the vote is in her power. So I went back and I looked at the Medicare for all hearings that they had in 2019. And I thought, why weren't these a bigger deal? How could these be better? How could we maximize, to Sam's point about how hard it is to get media attention, how can we make this better and have more of an impact than it did the last time we tried this? And one thing that I noticed was that there was absolutely zero conversation about corruption. They had all of these corporate moderate Dems and Republicans obviously as well, lined up with their experts and their witnesses to explain why we couldn't have Medicare for all. And not a single question asked them how much they took from the various industries who have an interest in maintaining our for-profit healthcare system. As I watched, I went to Open Secrets and I Googled, every time someone says something negative about Medicare for all, let me Google what their campaign donation profile is. And to a T, they were at the top of the donor list for private health insurance industry, the pharmaceutical industry. I think that now, as 15 million new Americans have just lost their health insurance and everybody is really focused on how horrible that is when you're just trying to live your life and not die because you're forced to go to work because you're an essential worker and they run out of PPE and all of this stuff, that they would no longer have the excuse that they used to rely on and what they relied on in 2019, which is that if you like your healthcare, you can keep it. We're in a unique historical moment where you cannot say people like their health insurance, which was the number one defense all of these corporatists used during the 2019 hearing. That's why I think this is a unique opportunity.
I mean, I think we're in a uniquely a unique crisis. I'm not quite convinced that what you're saying will galvanize those things. I mean, I think, getting rid of Richie Neal who wouldn't allow people to even literally say the words Medicare for all at that hearing,
I agree,
would also be very effective.
And that was on my ask list.
And well, I mean literally getting him out of office. I mean, you're not going to take it. I mean,
sure.
It's just simply not going to happen that he's going to be removed from committee chair. I mean, again, like Nancy Pelosi could at one point just say, I'm going to call your bluff and I'm willing to go in front of, I'm willing to allow the media as it is. I mean, look, I think you and I agree. the way that the MSNBC and CNN and ABC and Fox who knows how they would do it, but they would all just make it look like you have 5 or 10 Democrats who are being obstructionist. AOC has got higher name recognition amongst Republicans. They hate her as well, if not more so than she does even amongst Democrats. I don't think that the popular opinion would go in the way that you think it would. We have a disagreement about that. I should also say, in terms of we want to talk about if people want to learn more about Medicare for All, the Healthcare Now, Nurses United, the DSA, Our Revolution, a bunch of these organizations have a conference this weekend, actually, that you can go online and see it. I think some of the stuff might come out later. I'm not sure. But you can register for that. You can see these strategies. They're going to approach the states, and
everyone should watch that and weigh in.
Yes, and part of this is you got a lot of people who've been trying to push for this, single payer health insurance since Truman. And there are a lot of forces aligned. It's not just insurance. It's also like big hospitals and doctors to a certain extent too. And so, I think from my perspective, the complete assuredness and the efficacy of this strategy, and the sense that anybody who didn't sign on to this strategy is a sellout and not concerned about Medicare for All, I think was, I don't think that was helpful. And
I want to be clear that I have never been.
No, I'm not saying that you did that.
No, but you're talking to me. So look, if I could just say, I have never been assured about the strategy. And I think a lot of us who are very actively debating this issue on the left in good faith were clear that we don't know what the outcome is going to be, but we have a different assessment than you, Sam, of what the political costs are going to be. And as Karl Rove has said, political goodwill is not something you can put in the bank and grow interest on. It's something that when you have it, you have to spend it. And we just have a disagreement about what this moment demands and what the opportunities in this moment are. Can I ask you, Sam? I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think that's true. I mean, what the moment demands is, I think we're probably in agreement. But the strength of the tools that you want to use, I think we probably do disagree on that.
I want to ask you something. When AOC was running, I remember her saying, there was this interview she was doing with Justice Democrats, I believe, where she said she'd rather be a one-term congressperson and fight and know that she fought tooth and nail. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, I'm sorry, but then to, make compromises. And, it feels like the argument that is being made in defense of the squad more broadly in this moment is that it's better for them to protect themselves. I'm not saying you said this, but a lot of folks were saying, oh gosh, they'll lose their seats. They're going to be completely disempowered, et cetera, if they do anything antagonistic to Pelosi. Do you think that the way that she and the squad have behaved suggests that she no longer feels like it'd be worth it to shoot her shot and be a one-term congresswoman? Do you think that she's changed?
I hope that that's not her perspective, because like I say, she was instrumental in getting rid of Eliot Engel. Mm-hmm. I think that's very consequential. I think that he
did a lot of that too.
Huh?
Eliot Engel was instrumental in getting rid of Eliot Engel.
Well, yeah, it's true. But I think, if there's no Justice Democrats, if there's no AOC, I think it's highly unlikely that that would have happened. And I think that frankly, the perspective that she would just force the vote and then leave Congress, I mean, if that's what you're suggesting.
Well, no, I think it was ridiculous, the idea that her seat was at all in jeopardy because she did this. I think that was silly.
Her seat's not in jeopardy. What's in jeopardy is like the upside for that. It's contingent upon a lot of things that you're talking about public opinion galvanizing around this vote and whatnot. And you and I have a different sense of what the costs are too. And I think, I may have a wider berth for accepting that someone could that idea is that someone else could perceive that idea is not as strong as I do. But I think that one of the things that you should always assess when you get into a fight is your chances of winning. And in every fight that you lose, there are costs, and there can also be benefits in losing fights. And I think my sense of what was to be lost was greater than what was to be gained. And I suspect that was also, the progressives' perspective. You don't think that the PAYGO exemption for the time being is relevant?
Nope, that's not what I said at all, Sam. That's not what I said.
They could have gotten more.
Yes, they could have gotten more.
They could have gotten more.
It was incredibly important, which is why they should have gotten more.
Maybe. I think this is going to be sufficient for the next 2 years at least, because I think we're going to be, like you say, dealing with this pandemic for a long time, and just about everything in our society is impacted by it. But I want them to continue to amass power. I don't think they have much. I don't think the left has much. I don't think that people are going to galvanize around the things that you think that they are, based upon just the fact that Joe Biden beat out the candidate for Medicare for All in the Democratic primary.
But what do you take from that? What do you take from the fact that Joe Biden won? Do you think that's an indictment of Medicare for All as a policy?
No, I don't think it's an indictment of Medicare for All, but I just don't think it motivates people as much as we would like it to.
Could it be that beating Trump was just a bigger priority than Medicare for All in the last election, and that it's actually not a referendum on people's preference for that policy?
I'm not saying it's a referendum on people's preference for that policy. I'm talking it is a measure as to what they are how much they're willing to trade off for that. For instance, gun control. Gun control it has enormous support, broadly speaking, but it's not people's first issue that they vote on.
Right, I agree. I think that what happened in the election was that beating Trump was people's number one priority. And for a lot of reasons we can talk about, including the media, the perception was that Joe Biden was the only person who could beat Trump. So, I don't think that it's the fact that Biden won really says anything at all about the status of Medicare for All.
Well, Sam,
it does say that it does say that people can find at least one other thing that's more important.
A thing that no longer exists.
Right, but maybe there could be others. I mean, look, what was the pushback when the Democrats passed the HEROES Act? What was the pushback to the COBRA subsidies? I mean, I talked about it for a long time, and I spoke to AOC about it. Actually, she came on my show and said that was horrible. It's garbage. And I can tell you, the response to that was crickets.
Yeah, there should have been. I know that Jimmy Dore is very vocal about that as well. So I think that there needs to be more coordination across left media to drive the kind of enthusiasm which came very organically around Force the Vote.
We don't have that kind of strength. I got news for you. Like, this is honestly, it's like it's like bald men arguing over a comb when we start talking about this.
I disagree. And I said this to Jimmy Dore as he was critical of me for not talking more about the failures of the CARES Act, and I think that that's right.
Not CARES. I'm talking the HEROES.
Sorry, the HEROES Act. The issue is
the CARES Act was
in the spring. But I am personally talking about the CARES Act, but regardless, I think that part of the issue is, I know personally, I'm like constantly looking, journalism is crap. I'm constantly looking to people like Sirota and Dave Dayen and like the few outlets that are covering, Stein at Washington Post, the few people who are covering what I need to know here or there. And then I try to amplify it to the best of my ability. But it feels like I'm just doing a one-woman kind of like impromptu comms task here. And it does feel like shouting into the void sometimes. And I think that there could be a lot more coordination to drive home certain messages. We're all talking about the same thing on the same day. We all get direct feeds from the reporters who are doing this stuff so we don't miss something. There's so much happening, something important doesn't fall through the cracks. And we talk about how to frame issues in a way that they're accessible and relatable to people. I think that even if you disagree with Jimmy Dore, we could have had a conversation even about how we could
I watched
reframe
people trying to have a conversation with Jimmy. I watched that. I saw that.
I was talking about you and I having a conversation, or
Oh,
whomever else
listen,
it was.
I'm totally open to that. I'm totally open to that idea. And all of those reporters you talk about, I have a lot of respect for, and do as much as I can to promote them. You know, I got the Sirota's on a list right now who we're going to book.
Sam, if I could jump in right here as the kind moderator, I think something you just said was very important. You're describing the salience of issues among voters. And we all saw Bernie lose the Democratic primary, even though most of the primary voters, when asked about the issues, agreed with him. And your notion is that, well, they simply felt that beating Trump was a more salient issue and that they perceived Biden as the better candidate. So with that in mind, if you want better electoral outcomes for one, then shouldn't the effort be to change which issues are most salient?
In terms of like what people, what they perceive as being most salient?
Yeah.
I mean,
change perceptions, right?
Yeah, I think that is, I think that's hard to do. I mean, like I've watched. I mean, look.
You don't have to tell Bree that.
That's why we're trying. That's why we're trying.
I know, but I'm saying that maybe if I want different outcomes for those issues, maybe there is other tactics that can be pursued. I mean, because and I think the way to get to that is through more through grassroots organizing, and I'm not a grassroots organizer. I do think that there needs to be, more organizational strength on the ground. But then I also do think that what you need to do is literally get to a critical mass of lawmakers who support these positions. And we're just simply not there yet. I mean,
right, but how do we get there? So I'm not a grassroots organizer. You're not a grassroots organizer. Us sitting on our platform saying we need more grassroots organizing is, I would argue, less effective than using our platforms for what media, what we can do.
I think one of the ways you do that is, frankly, you support organizations that are primarying Democrats. I think that's incredibly helpful. I think like what we're seeing out of Chuck Schumer right now is just out of a fear of a primary. I think what we've seen in New York, we got rid of the IDC because of primaries. I think primarying Democrats, I mean, I'm in favor of primarying Democrats, every single Democrat. And, at one point it becomes like, do you want to deploy all your resources on something that's not going to be effective, or someone who's not as high on the list? But I think that primaries are a huge mechanism. And in my mind, the best vehicle I've seen for primarying Democrats in over 20 years is the Justice Democrats. And this is a good example right here. Pop that up.
I wanted to talk about it. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I wanted to ask you what you thought about this.
I absolutely agree. And I think the key, I think the misinterpretation of this is that sometimes it's also not. She's right sometimes. And I think it's,
Can you appreciate how frustrating it was for folks? Because literally we were told, I understand you can say that it's just conditional in the context, and that's a fair argument. That's completely fair. But there are people who made this argument for force the vote whom were told, no, you're just stupid. That's wrong. That's a bad tactic. If they don't win Medicare for all, then there's no point of it. There's no point in getting someone on the record, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Well,
I actually hate this. And I actually think it makes everyone look wrong. Honestly.
You hate what?
Well, the last sentence here. Sometimes we vote for the historical record to let future generations know we did everything we could, which is to say nothing.
Well, that's what they're 100%.
I agree. That's the weakest. Yeah. That's the weakest reason to do it. That's just sort of self-satisfaction, and I think that's the most vacuous of reasons to do that. But really, what she's saying is, on some level, it's like one is to get a sense of where people stand on this. Now, in the context of Medicare for all, we do know where they stand. I mean, that's built into the thing, right? We want to get those. We can almost exactly know what the vote count would be on a Medicare for all vote. And then the second one is
not. I mean, to me, that was never my favorite part of the argument. I'm a comms person. I care about the comms piece. But I mean,
the second one here that she says, is sometimes these votes create real political pressure that forces development. Now, sometimes they do, but she's talking about impeachment, and the impeachment vote is a big wedge issue for Republicans. I think she was talking about the impeachment.
Yeah, this is all about impeachment.
And I think it's going to create a bunch of wedge issues. In fact, I think McConnell, you can actually see what happened with McConnell. McConnell put out a trial balloon in the New York Times. And when the New York Times is reporting first on what McConnell's thinking, I think you get a good sense of what he's doing. He's trying to assess whether it makes sense for him to ditch, how much he can afford to ditch Donald Trump. And he found out he couldn't. And which is why there's been this sort of like dramatic shift. He found out after those 11 Republican congresspeople got nailed for voting for impeachment. And so I think this is one of those times where you're creating a wedge. But I don't think that the Medicare for All thing creates a wedge that is in any way helpful. I don't see how it's builds on it. I mean, we have a good sense. Look, if you think there's about a pool of 120 Democrats who would vote against Medicare for All, you and I could sit down in a couple of days and come up with a list of 40 that should be primaried. I mean, there are organizations that have assessed, what's the...
Well, if there are 120, then it would be a list of 120.
Well, but I mean, do we have the resources to challenge 120? I mean, that's the question.
I don't want to gotcha you, but how much of a wedge has impeachment been? Because I remember coming on your program at the beginning of last year, and we had it, or I think might have been the end of 2019, and we had a conversation about impeachment. And you and I both supported impeachment because, the guy's a fucking criminal. Even if it's not going to work, fine, whatever, just do it. It's the least bad option for this Congress to do, because obviously with Trump as president, McConnell as majority leader, it's not like you're going to do anything great right then. So you might as well expose the criminality of the Republican Party. And you thought at the time that impeachment is going to be this wedge issue that's going to destroy Susan Collins in Maine. It's going to destroy these swing state senators. And we watched that happen in North Carolina, Maine.
I
these
agree.
like prime plum targets.
I agree.
Did not go that way. It is
Well,
surprising.
they did take the Senate.
Considering the partisan lead, they did take the Senate.
They did take the Senate.
But considering the partisan lead of a state like Maine.
No, I agree. But look, it did not. It wasn't so much that it was going to be a wedge, that it was going to be you were going to tie people to Donald Trump. You were going to tie these lawmakers to Donald Trump, and that was going to sink them. And
it didn't hurt them.
Well,
it didn't hurt Burr. It didn't hurt Collins.
I agree. It should have hurt them. I think it was not the campaigns that were run against them wasn't effective. But the Democrats did end up taking the Senate, and I'm not convinced that it didn't hurt. I think you had good candidates in Ossoff and Warnock, and they hit the corruption quite a bit. Impeachment in of itself was not enough, but I think the idea that they were so closely associated with Donald Trump did not help them. I mean, Donald Trump came down and campaigned, and it did not help them. So I don't think it was as effective as I thought it was, but they did end up taking the Senate. I mean, the goal was to take the Senate, and I thought that they would get more out of it.
But, just talking about the Georgia races, they weren't talking about impeachment then. They were talking about $2,000 checks. They're talking about, elect us. McConnell's no longer the majority leader. Democrats are in charge. We're going to give you
I don't think anything
there you go. It's free real estate.
No, I agree. I don't think anything that was going to happen in January was going to be central, but it was like one more association with Donald Trump that they hewed themselves to him. And they both of them tried to do that.
Motherfucker! I was on a roll. Damn it. Okay. I just had to stop you right there. Fuck. So, Simsadi, you brought up that Medicare, that force the vote is a waste of time. It's a dead-end strategy. I failed you. So, something that I want to bring up real quick is that we can't lose sight of how important it is to continue to advocate for Medicare for all, organize for Medicare for all, build capacity about the need to introduce Medicare for all, support candidates who run on campaign promises to implement Medicare for all. And just because this strategy to force the vote won't necessarily lead to the intended outcome of having Medicare for all at least brought to the House floor for a vote, does not mean that we do not still fight like hell for it. And I hope that we do not lose sight of that. Just because force the vote will not guarantee the intended outcome of pushing the envelope when it comes to bringing Medicare for all to the House floor and getting more candidates who right now are sitting members of Congress to support bringing Medicare for all to the House floor. While we try to, outside of politics, outside of electoral politics, continue to have these discussions that may or may not be counterproductive as to how we can do what we can do on our ends so that we are pushing for Medicare for all as organizers, as advocates, as those who are engaged and participating in the political process, who will support candidates who are running on a Medicare for all platform. We can do that on our ends. And we should not stop just because force the vote does not look to be a winning strategy. But it could be argued that any active advocacy toward Medicare for all will be met with heavy opposition, especially if those who have more control, literal control over the narrative, that being the mainstream media, decide to demonize the organizations or the candidates who are supporting Medicare for all, who might be planning to primary a few corporate-backed Democrats in 2022. Listen, either way you spin it, Medicare for all will be vilified by those who will lose, who have something to lose if we were to move forward with a single-payer system. We already know who those stakeholders are. In the for-profit privatized healthcare system that tends to favor and benefit and enrich handfuls of people, they are the ones who will exert their political power. They will continue to lobby on Washington. They will continue to fund acting members of Congress to directly oppose any legislation tied to Medicare for all. That is inevitable. That is to be expected. That's a guarantee. It doesn't mean that we give up on the prospect of envisioning Medicare for all one day reaching the House floor. My point is that it can be the most fail-proof strategy to push for Medicare for all, and it will still be hit with political opposition in high places that will attempt to make it a strategy that's just as dead in the water as force the vote.
And I'm sure you remember when Nancy Pelosi, when the Democrats won back the Senate, when they were not expected to.
You didn't pause the video right now. I just muted it. Sorry.
They won back the House.
Won back the House. They didn't win back the
yeah.
Senate until 08.
No, that's false. They won back in 2006.
The House in 06.
No, in the Senate. The Senate. In 2006 they won back the Senate. They had 51 votes in the U.S. Senate. They won it with Jim Webb and
Tester.
Yes, and Tester, and a few others. I promise you that's the case.
Democrats gained 6 Senate seats by defeating Republican senators in the states of Missouri, Montana, Ohio, and Page is still loading.
Rhode Island was another one.
Okay, 2006.
Yeah.
And they had the House and the Senate.
Reid became majority leader in 2007, and Pelosi became the Speaker of the House.
Okay.
And it was then that the left wanted the Congress to revoke the funding for the Iraq War, to stop the war. that, this is what we've been fighting for the past 4 years now. And we elected the House, and this came with a lot of left energy, and a lot of people had soured on the war. So defund the war. And then another demand was impeach Bush.
Yeah.
And neither of these things happened. Neither of these things happened.
Nancy Pelosi was bragging about it.
Bragging
that she didn't
it was within Nancy Pelosi's purview as the Speaker of the House, and the House is supposed to, that's the people's house. It's fundamental to our constitutional system that the president just can't wage war that has to be paid for by the House of Representatives. And so defunding the war, like just refusing to pay for it, not even voting against it, just refusing to pay for it, would be enough to stop the war. And they didn't do it.
Correct.
And they didn't do it. So I just, just reaching back to that history.
Well, let me.
If you see any parallels to that.
I don't know about parallels per se. Like there wasn't, what happened in 2006 was the war was what was driving a lot of activist energy. I think ultimately what won the House at that time was corruption. Mm-hmm. This guy who was involved in a scandal where he was basically preying upon his interns. It's Capitol Hill pages, and there was cover up from it, and you had like the number 2. I remember, can't remember his name, but the guy from Buffalo. Guys. I mean, it was extensive, but the worst was the big one that hit in the fall was this Mark Foley scandal.
The Foley scandal, yeah.
And I can tell you, I moderated a panel with Conyers and with Elizabeth Holtzman and I think it was Lewis Lapham at Town Hall, and Conyers had a book like this of what you would impeach George Bush for. Mm-hmm. And people should not misunderstand it. I've been saying for probably close to a year, particularly around when Pelosi first announced the PAYGO thing, which I think was in the fall of 2019, that I had come around to basically the position of I would rather someone whose ideology, I would rather Tim Ryan be Speaker of the House, because then it puts progressives in direct oppositional. Even from the conventional wisdom, I don't think Nancy Pelosi is a progressive, but she has these sort of bona fides because she's from San Francisco.
Yeah. And she was one of the co-founders of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. In both worlds.
I can understand why half a dozen members of the House don't want to simply be responsible for not, for Nancy Pelosi not being elected or for being obstructionist to that happen. But if I had my druthers, I would rather see Tim Ryan and just be in opposition to who the speaker is, be perceived as directly oppositional to them ideologically. But I think it's easy to make assumptions about how things are going to turn out and not know the cost that different members of the caucus perceive. But that's what I would have done.
Bri, you made this comic?
So I did editorial.
The private healthcare industry was introduced by Nixon through executive order. Now, I don't necessarily know what presidential power Biden would have to completely nullify an entire industry that right now is required to stay in motion. Our health, our treatment, emergency services are incumbent on the system continuing to work. How do we make a transition, though, swift and orderly is the question that a lot of people also argue as well. I think that's also tied to one of the criticisms of Force the Vote, is that if we're talking about around a 4-year rollout anyway, we are already experiencing time that's of the essence without any executive order that Biden does have the power to do, temporarily at least, to extend Medicare to everyone who needs treatment, right? If they have contracted COVID-19. There is absolutely a way to do that, I would say, at the president's desk. But we're talking about the same guy who said that if, by some stretch, Medicare for All passed both chambers of House, that he would veto it. So, I mean, the question is, how would we do this promptly? And again, that's just like the mechanics, right? That's we're in the weeds at this point. My original intuitive response would be, of course, the president can find a way to invoke presidential power and move us to Medicare for All by way of executive order. I believe it would be something along the lines of extending Medicare to everyone, because it's already a system that's in place. If there was a way to grandfather everybody in and just kind of, remove that age threshold, then I don't see why this could not be accomplished. Hey, Cody. How do I create a stronger sense of self? Clay, thank you for the follow. I think creating a stronger sense of self starts with becoming comfortable with yourself. You're comfortable with who you are. And if there is no way for you to find acceptance with who you are, if you have a hard time accepting who you are, then maybe that is indicative of something that you recognize as an issue, or I don't want to say flaw, but some sort of thing that you think would better suit you if you addressed it and fixed whatever it is that you are unhappy with. And that can be an incredible sign of growth. That reflection often does help to try to find the best way to improve yourself. Maybe we could sell it as something for the pandemic, and then once everyone sees what it's like, we could leverage our power to keep it. Yeah, no, totally. Oh no. Mark Sack, thank you so much for the 5 tier 1 subbies. Thank you. Oh, look. How Biden could give everyone Medicare on his own. Well, let's see, shall we? Any other gifters that I should know about, maybe? Maybe? Any other gifters that I should know about? Maybe? Okay, he won't. But the creation application of existing laws that would allow it reflects exactly how a Biden administration needs to be thinking.
How Biden could give everyone Medicare on his own.
I don't have to read.
Okay, he won't. But the creative application of existing laws that would allow it reflects exactly how a Biden administration needs to be thinking. This story is part of the Prospects series on how the next president can make progress without new legislation. Read all of our Day 1 agenda articles here. The people of Libby, Montana, population 2,628, share something in common with the rest of the developed world, but not their compatriots in the United States. They all have access to a single-payer, Medicare for All system. As part of the Affordable Care Act, the residents of Libby, who were exposed to hazardous airborne asbestos from a vermiculite mine owned by the W.R. Grace Company, were made eligible for Medicare, for free, at the discretion of the Social Security Administration and the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS. It was codified in Section 1881A of the Social Security Act. The language of the statute refers to any individuals subject to an environmental exposure, though it was well understood at the time that this was about Libby. The fact that the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, Max Baucus, hailed from Montana played no small part in creating Medicare for all Libyans. But the principle was solid. Through no fault of their own, these residents were...
What is it that you're supposed to say if you're supposed to be like in a choir and singing along to the word watermelon pineapple? To make it look like you are watermelon pineapple?
were subject to a dangerous environmental hazard that would trigger long-term medical complications. The government considered it only right to pick up the exorbitant healthcare costs for these individuals. There's an environmental health hazard spreading through the entire country right now. It's infecting people unsuspectingly and killing hundreds of thousands. It's bound to saddle those who survive with long-term and potentially debilitating health consequences. And using Section 1881A, the incoming Biden administration can give all 11 million people infected with COVID, and if they want to be really aggressive, all Americans who have tested positive for coronavirus the option of free Medicare coverage, immediately. I do not expect Joe Biden to use this power on Inauguration Day to instantly turn the United States into a single-payer country. But there's nothing in the law that would appear to prevent him from doing it. This is the larger point. The United States Code doesn't make for scintillating leisure reading, but buried in it are countless options for a president to help people. And once you start orienting yourself in that fashion, thinking about what you can do under the law rather than what you cannot, the possibilities really open up. The primary pilot program in Section 1881A is the Libby, Montana program. But the executive branch is also given the authority to establish optional pilot programs to any area subject to a public health emergency declaration. The entire United States has been under a public health emergency since January 31, 2020, due to the coronavirus. It's possible that the Environmental Protection Agency would have to declare a separate public health emergency under the Superfund law to comply with the statute, but Biden's EPA administrator could easily do so. Individuals eligible for Medicare would have to have spent 6 months in the geographic area subject to the emergency. Since the area is the entire United States, this should not be a problem, either. At that point, the individual with exposure to the environmental hazard files an application for Medicare benefits, and receives them if they meet the proper criteria. The statute cites that those eligible for benefits must have a diagnosis of ailments like mesothelioma and other consequences from asbestos exposure. But an addendum at the bottom makes the statute applicable to any individual exposed to a public health hazard to which an emergency declaration applies, based on such medical conditions, diagnostic standards, and other criteria as the Secretary specifies. Cutting through the legislation essay, this means that HHS could create a specific pilot program around COVID-19. We know that there are going to be specific long-term costs from COVID-19. While we're still learning about long-haul COVID patients, it is possible that they could experience a lifetime of health problems from their infection, whether through severe lung damage, heart failure, or gastrointestinal complications. The cost of managing these difficulties will be high, and probably out of reach for most people. It's cost-effective to put them on Medicare and ensure that they don't have to go bankrupt because they were unlucky enough to contract the virus. America did something similar with kidney disease under Richard Nixon and for first responders with respiratory problems after spending time at 9/11 cleanup sites. But unlike those two programs, which required congressional action, a president invoking Section 1881A could do this through executive action, rather than having to get a new law through Congress. If you really wanted to push it, you could do what they did in Libya: give Medicare to everyone, whether they showed symptoms or not, based on the potential for an environmental exposure. As long as the runoff from the W.R. Grace mine was still in the air, residents of Libya needed the peace of mind that they would be covered from the health consequences. The entire U.S. public needs that same kind of reassurance in the face of coronavirus. Yes, Joe Biden ran against a single-payer system in the election. He did run on free coronavirus treatment for all of those infected, and triggering Section 1881A would do just that. This declaration could also guarantee a free vaccine. He's not likely to make the incredibly aggressive move to use COVID as a pretext to give everyone the option for government-run healthcare. That's just reality. But it's also reality that Biden has this option to protect people suffering from coronavirus, and even those afraid to get tested because they know they cannot afford treatment. Furthermore, Section 1881A is the kind of creative policy thinking that's going to be required of a Biden administration on day one if it wants to make progress for the American people, especially if Mitch McConnell and the Republicans hold on to the Senate. Maybe Biden doesn't want to instantly create Medicare for all. But through a range of laws that vest power in the president, he could seize drug patents to dramatically lower the cost of prescription drugs. He could change bad Obamacare rules that cost low-income families using the exchange's roughly $2 billion every year. He could do all kinds of things laid out in the Day One agenda that would have tangible and enduring benefits for people. Since 1789, the legislative branch has been placing a set of powerful authorities in the president's lap. It does not violate any notion of our system of government for the president to look for creative ways to use those authorities. In fact, it's the very job description of the chief executive. If President-elect Biden wants to respond to the tragedy of coronavirus by giving millions of people public health care, he could. And he should be thinking about how to do a whole lot more.
Joe Biden wasn't even willing to exert power over congressional Republicans and go ahead and change his mind and agree to a $2,000 stimulus check instead of the already agreed upon $1,400, totaling $2,000 as part of his economic recovery plan. I don't think that he's going to be giving everyone free healthcare anytime soon. Fuck. I wish. He also said he would veto it. Yeah, he did. He did say that. In the midst of a pandemic. I've grown to love you. I never know if that's like, I kind of hated you in the beginning, but you're okay now. But thank you so much. Either way, thank you for the kind words. Biden could also unilaterally wipe out all federal student loan debt, but won't. That's true. What's going on, Five Head? Smooth Brain, how you doing? He can wipe out he can wipe out federal student loan debt, that's been administered through the Department of Education. There's only a very small amount of student loan debt that's accumulated through private loan or private mortgages. Is it 95%? Yeah, something like that. Honestly, QC, I don't think that any leftists really had faith in Biden. I don't. I think that if anything, some leftists who are willing to listen to the possibility of necessitating harm reduction during this time of great economic despair and insecurity, seeing that COVID-19 has ravaged low-income and non-white communities disproportionately, that this was reason enough to vote him out of office. And if voting for Joe Biden meant getting rid of Trump, then I think a lot of leftists who were willing to make that sacrifice. But in terms of whether or not there was an agreement to throw one's full faith behind Joe Biden's capacity to serve as the president, his competence, I don't think that many leftists were so bamboozled to think that Joe Biden was going to be able to deliver on that front. I don't think so.
And her enormous unpopularity was really the hook that got you a lot of the scintillating coverage, including on the right-wing media, right? Right-wingers hate Pelosi. If Fox News is talking about Pelosi, then MSNBC feels compelled to defend Pelosi. Pelosi's on the TV giving interviews. Pelosi is terrible in interviews. You also saw that horrible clip that came out of the Hillary Clinton campaign. And the whole thing just becomes a rat race that inures to the benefit of the left and Medicare for all. But you're designing this from scratch. You have an opportunity to admit, what would you ask for? Do you think that there are things that would have been worth using the political capital?
Like what would have been worth what would have been a good ask? I mean,
see you, Professor.
I mean, honestly, I think committee positions are hugely important. And I don't know. I honestly don't.
Was heating up?
I'm not being clear. I don't know how much, when that vote comes 43-13 or whatever on the energy and commerce, or at the very least, like Katie Porter getting that waiver. Other people have gotten waivers. They could have gotten that waivers. She got squeezed a little bit. Maybe I would get rid of seniority on committees as an organizing principle, because that acts against the interests of progressives. Because
then we don't get Bernie, right? then we lose out on our Bernie.
Well, I mean, it's in the House, right? But
sure. Is that seniority system still in the House? Because I thought they abolished that.
I'm pretty sure it is. I would get rid of it in the Senate too, to be honest with you. I would have liked to seen Durbin not get judiciary, but you're right. Bernie might have had a problem in that situation. But I think anything that can get newer members more power, I think is good, because I feel like Nancy Pelosi has been leader of the Democrats for almost 20 years, and there's been like maybe a half a dozen, at least, Republican leaders in the House, and I think that is, it's shocking.
Yeah, it really is.
I think I would look for things that are
Cincinnati, you're so dramatic.
Because I am of the mind that the left does not have much power right now, and I would look for things that would enhance that power. And maybe it would be like we want a specific person in the DCCC, so that the resources are deployed differently in terms of who gets reelected. Off the top of my head, I can just say, to answer it off the top of my head in a general sense, I would look for more structural things.
Okay.
Because I want to build that power over time, because, like I say, it just gets back to, use my phone to nail in a nail. Like I could probably get that nail into this, wood desk with my phone, but then the phone is done. And all I've done is that one nail. And I would
right, but
rather.
I understand what you thought that what are the concrete losses that the squad would accrue if they were to withhold a vote for Nancy Pelosi. And so if you're saying that what you really would ask them to hold it out for is committee chairs, the committee seats, and they went ahead and withheld the vote in order to get committee seats, well then by definition they couldn't even take away committee seats from them, right? Because they would have gotten them as part of their campaign. So what is it that we're so afraid of them losing? Because for me, it's not that I was so sure of the benefit, but there was just no downside to the thing. They already talk shit about Medicare for all. There's already billions of dollars of advertising against Medicare for all. The media is already against it. It can't get any worse than this. So what is the downside to trying?
Well, I'm not convinced, frankly, that 5 freshman or sophomore Congress people or 6 or whatever preventing Pelosi from getting this. I know you're convinced that people that somehow, despite the media imbalance and despite the conventional wisdom.
Don't talk about the upsides, because I don't know about the upsides either. My question right now is what are the downsides?
I'm saying the downsides. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that in that standoff, I'm not convinced that they wouldn't pay a massive price in terms of their popularity. I think that there may be a lot of people who turn against Congress, them who are somewhat supportive, and to the extent that they have, I mean, I understand
they wouldn't lose any power outside of Washington.
Power, presumably, holding over Pelosi, but I'm not convinced that Pelosi wouldn't have just called their bluff and say, okay, you can be responsible for freezing the Democratic House. Good luck.
Just like the Republicans have no problem.
But they have a different constituency, don't they? The Republicans have Republican constituency.
I think that we have a constituency that wants that kind of fight and to be activated as well, but the Democratic Party doesn't court them. We talk constantly on the left about there being 40 million people who don't vote, and all of these working class people who don't vote, and all of these working people, longtime labor families that used to be Democrats for generations, and now they went ahead and voted for Trump, the Obama to Trump voter. We talk and talk and talk about these people, and never once does it seem to occur to us that maybe if we acted with a little more tenacity, maybe if we acted like we were fighting for people in the way that people thought Donald Trump was, the way he presented himself as being, that we could actually grow our ranks, that we could have more persuasive power, that doing the same thing we've been doing for the last 30 years of neoliberalism ain't it. I
agree, but I just don't think that holding up a vote for a vote that's going to lose in the House.
But no, Sam, stop. In this scenario, I'm asking you to design your perfect ask. It can be anything you want. Ask for anything.
That would be worth the thing. I mean, I can tell you what I think would be the good ask, but what I cannot tell you is exactly how I would assess, if I was one of those members of Congress, what the chances that Nancy Pelosi, I mean, I don't know, but it's not inconceivable to me that there was an attempt to leverage more, and Nancy Pelosi goes, go fuck yourself.
Right, but it's not leverage.
You want to be out there? Good luck. Good luck with what's going on out there.
But you're not doing it. And until you publicly withhold the vote. Like the point of this, the force of the vote is not some backroom deal that they always are doing and always negotiating. The whole persuasive value of force the vote is that they publicly humiliate Nancy Pelosi by not voting for her.
Your perception is that they're going to humiliate Nancy Pelosi and not themselves.
Yes, they're going to. No, regardless of what happens to the squad, Nancy Pelosi is humiliated if it's a public knowledge that she wasn't able to secure a vote for speaker after how many ever years that she's been in this seat.
You don't think it's going to be
upstart squad members declined to vote for her.
You don't think it's
a huge story.
I think Pelosi's savvy enough to spin the narrative right on its head.
To alienate Democrats from figures like Cory Bush and AOC or Ilhan Omar.
Hang on about that. I don't think the Democratic establishment can afford, if properly organized, can afford to alienate its own base any more than the Republican establishment can afford to alienate its
Trump. I don't think they should do that, but I mean,
They can't go from celebrating, oh, look at our diversity, and oh, look at the first openly gay elected, blah, blah, blah. They can't go from all of that to the next day. Remember the timing of all of this. That we won Georgia. Look at Mondaire Jones and look at Ossoff and Warnock. They can't turn from that and suddenly be like, yes, the two Muslim squad members, all these Black and brown people, women, #believe us, all the whole the Democrats
they demonize the fuck out of
because they built this edifice of identity politics and how wonderful all these young new upstarts are because they're good for the Democratic Party brand. They
reprimanded the shit out of her because she was against AIPAC.
Try to tell us that at the same time they're all horrible. At the same time they're doing it in defense.
If you deviate too far from the status quo, regardless of your identity, you will be reprimanded. You will be alienated. That's the reason why it's so hard to envision force the vote with the current cohort in Congress, the power dynamics in Congress, the willingness to throw some of the most progressive and diverse groups and coalitions in the Democratic Party completely under the bus. Butter Bay, thank you for the 1,000 biddies. And that's the whole thing. Like, I'm not trying to be a contrarian. I'm just going back and pulling specific moments in history where, various members of the squad were thrown to the doghouse because they had deviated so far from what is considered the status quo or the norm. They 100% experienced repercussions, right? Now, not to say that, but the thing about Ilhan Omar is that she was accused of being or making anti-Semitic comments, but there would be there's a formula in place to take anything that is so far removed from the agenda of the establishment, vilify it, demonize the people tied to this counter message or counter narrative, and then push them as far away from any cohesive, solid coalition making up the vast majority of the Democratic Party as possible. That is how you achieve alienation. That is how you start to launch smear ads, internal smear ads. Once a member of the party becomes so problematic, it's best to try to do away with them, hurt their popularity, try to change people's perceptions or opinions from the outside, members of the electorate, try to force them to be in a position where they are no longer in the good graces of their constituents. That's 100% absolutely within the purview of Nancy Pelosi's capabilities. I wouldn't dare question her and her ability to be an absolute monster if it came down to it. All right, Chad, I gotta wash my hands.
I think like there are institutional things. It's sort of the Machiavelli's. If you come for the king, or in this case the queen, make sure you take her out. And because the strategy of trying
What happens? Because I've asked you this several times now. What happens to them?
I mean,
if
look,
they lose?
I haven't worked in Congress, so I don't have enough of awareness institutionally. But it's about resources that you can have access to, in terms of money, in terms of staff. It could be committee positions. It could be you get an opportunity to introduce some amendments that, or you could get maybe some appropriations to go to your district because maybe you need to build a community center. I mean, there's a whole there's a lot of books that outline the sort of transactional nature of these things that are obscured
I'm aware.
from us.
A couple of them on the shelf behind me.
Of course. So you recognize that there could be for Congress people who want to get reelected, who want to be able to deliver material benefits for their constituents, or maybe some of them, are like they want to be the person who gets out in front of the cameras. Whatever it is, there's no doubt that leadership has. We don't know.
We don't know what the consequences are.
Part of it. Right. Everyone is so willing to say we can't do this because the consequences are so high. And I'm sorry, you cannot make that argument if you can't you can't even put together a little bit of a cogent argument about what.
It depends. Well, it depends.
I want to say this. What's important is I said as part of the ask. That's why I started with the ask. You can ask to ward off against any of those possibilities down the line. If you think you're going to lose committee appointments, make committee appointments part of your ask. If you think you're going to lose out funding to your district, stipulate that you are only going to get this vote if you get commensurate funding with what you got last year or whatever you asked for. The sky is the limit, and if you don't get it, then you just say, I'm going to dethrone Nancy Pelosi and put someone in her place with less power. Because let's talk about why Nancy Pelosi has the power she has. It's not just because she's been there a long time. It's because other people owe her favors because she is the most powerful fundraiser in Congress. So whoever she can replace with, it's not going to be as powerful.
The HEROES Act.
It's not going to be able to do as much harm also.
The HEROES Act, for instance. One of the big criticisms of the HEROES Act, where she had the opportunity to negotiate and maybe get a skinnier package over the course of the summer, maybe that $1.8 trillion thing, right? Part of it, I think they were afraid that if they passed that $1.8 trillion deal with the Trump administration, that Trump might win the presidency. It's not inconceivable, actually. I mean, he didn't lose by very much. But another reason why, and I think if you go back and look at the way that she defended the HEROES Act, it was a wish list for her committee chairs, and her committee chairs all have their constituents as well. And I'm talking within Congress, right? And so she is delivering by putting these things in there. Her committee chairs can go back to their voters and say, I fought for, the easement on the river that everybody's talking about in my district. And that was in there. And that's why all these things were sort of larded up with stuff that was basically a laundry list of stuff. And the committee chairs can dole those things out, which are, essentially, currency to the members of their committees, and they can bring those home to their districts and say, I fought for this, or I got this. And so there are machinations, I think, within Congress that, yes, I can't sit here and tell you definitively what the price would be for these individuals. And I think to a certain extent, you don't know, right? You don't know down the road what you're going to need in terms of favors from different people. And the question is just simply you weigh it in terms of what the cost benefit analysis is. And I think, I am inclined to give leeway to people who I think are closest to my political disposition in Congress, more leeway to them than I would others.
Why should Pelosi ever do anything the squad wants? Why should she ever listen to the squad?
Right now?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that they have the power to make her do what they want. There may be things that she needs from them at times. Like, will you go out and campaign for this in these areas and amongst these people? Yes, I will. Will you give me this? Okay. I mean, I would imagine there's some type of transactional stuff that happens along those lines as well. And you can sour relationships so that's not possible. You can maintain relationships so there's an opportunity there. I mean, this is.
When you say relationships, I just want to be clear because you and I both understand that things don't happen in Congress because people are nice or said something nice publicly about them.
I'm not saying that.
I know. I said you and I both understand this. We're in agreement. I'm not patronizing. I know you know this very, very well.
At the end of this line, can we go to questions?
Sure. That it's not about whether or not
you don't get a vote.
Whether someone's nice or not, it's about power. And so a lot of people in the course of this have been saying to me, Briahna, you're a dumb moron who doesn't understand what power is. I would just like to take this moment to say there have been a lot of really ugly, hateful, personal things said about me that have offended me much more than anything Jimmy Dore has said, some of which by people who are in your employ, some of which are people, and I don't hold you responsible for them because I think that's silly. But I would like to say that I don't want to make this argument about that. And I think that we can all have the self-control to not be petty and personal. But I have been told that I just don't understand how power works. And I think that's quite the opposite. I know that power doesn't work by saying nice things about Nancy Pelosi in public. But at the end of the day, she doesn't owe you anything in private. The squad will go and campaign for whoever the hell Nancy Pelosi tells them to campaign for, because Nancy Pelosi is powerful and the squad is weak. And that's always going to be the case, because Nancy Pelosi has spent decades being a fundraising power horse, and the squad hasn't. But in this instance, because of the procedural quirk and the narrow margin in the House, they had legitimate power. And I don't care what they did with it. I don't care if it was forced to vote. I don't care if it was something else. Okay. But my primary concern is that they chose not to use it, despite the fact that there has been a very, I think, poor articulation of what they would lose in doing so.
Well, AOC has, in fact, actually not gone out and campaigned for people that Pelosi, and they've been on opposite sides of this in multiple situations over the course of the past cycle. I mean, do you think Nancy Pelosi was in favor of AOC? The squad promoting getting rid of Elliot Engel? I think
they're doing a little dance around each other, but if push comes to shove, Nancy Pelosi can make anybody do what she wants them to do. She's picking her battles and pulling her punches as well.
I think AOC has, in terms of like leading primaries and helping fund primaries and raise money for challengers is, I mean, look, the DCCC blacklisted any organization that was supposedly
I'm well aware.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm not convinced of that premise, and I think that's where she's chose to expend her power. My experience in institutions, my experience has been slightly different than that. Now it's not Congress, so maybe Congress operates under different rules than other institutions, but my experience is that you can, there are thresholds where you can alienate yourself. You can be a rival of someone, and you can alienate yourself so much that you're not able to even make negotiations that are in your mutual best interest.
First, no ableist language. Second, don't mince Bree's words. Bree was saying that AOC would likely cower to Nancy Pelosi if Nancy Pelosi use the old carrot and stick trick to get AOC to toe the line in exchange for something that would benefit not necessarily AOC directly, but an agenda of AOC, maybe something bigger than her, because Nancy Pelosi obviously would know how to call in a favor, and it wouldn't be something that would directly promote AOC's agenda for herself or her own individual career. It would have to be something that she's actively fighting for, a crumb of something she's actively fighting for. And that's how I think, Nancy Pelosi could talk AOC into toeing the line if need be. Now, that could be a seat at the table at as part of Joe Biden's climate change committee. It could be the green dream or whatever. It could be, honestly, it could be multiple nuanced positions that Nancy would let AOC in the squad like spearhead, maybe, if there was a call to maybe set up some sort of exploratory committee on the merits of a new housing paradigm. You know what I mean? Like, of course, Nancy could get creative, and I think that it would be to obviously get AOC to subvert to the agenda that Nancy Pelosi is demanding.
For some of the rude statements they have made about me or my moderation abilities, we could hear those, and we could decide whether or not to accept their apology, or failing that, ban them from the chat and from the show permanently.
You wanna pick questions? Have you been pulling them out, Virgil? I
don't know how to pull them out. I think you're the only one with the ability to do that, because
Okay.
I can see the chat, but I can't interact with it. Okay, let's get those questions.
Okay. I'm trying to just find things that are serious and not like this.
Okay, well, that's fine. No, that's good.
I'm not looking at these questions. Smoke dope all you want, Virgil.
Great. No, that's good. No, let's keep these coming. These are good. These are good points to make. I mean, if you want to ask a direct question to Sam or Bree, you can do that too. But if you want to address me, this is the sort of thing you need to be saying.
I mean, I don't.
Okay.
I mean, that's the only real question I've seen so far. Everything else is like guillotines. I will never apologize to Virgil, Texas. All right, I'm sorry, Sam. Like, it's not
That person who said
you
that.
don't have to answer this, Sam.
What's this question? When is Sam going on door?
Would you ever like just?
Okay, I think we're good. I just find it incredibly sad that all of these small donors and DSA invested resources in Congress people who ended up voting Pelosi, left enemy number one. There should have been an organized opposition. Not having one is a failure. Progressives need to start wielding their power every chance they get. They don't stream on Twitch. I don't think that they stream the podcast on Twitch. It's on YouTube. It all comes down to the argument of what power. What power do the Justice Democrats, the Progressive Coalition, which is a broader base of people within the Democratic Party, but more specifically, what power does the Justice Democrats have right now to wield in order to achieve legislative success? Non-binary superpowers, thank you for the follow. So you're saying that Justice Democrats withhold their vote to support this economic recovery package in order to demand that Medicare for all be brought to the House floor? Because that's literally political suicide. Non-binary superpowers, then that is literally sending a message to your constituents. You are fucking up the rapport with your constituents if you do that. You're sending a message to your constituents saying, I don't have enough tools in my toolkit to know how to get you both the economic recovery that you need because of your own personal experience with COVID-19 related economic downturn. And instead, I'm going to demand that we prioritize Medicare for all. See, you have to be strategic in the way that you wield your power, right? And let me be clear. I think it's important to note that just because the strategy of withholding the vote for Nancy's speakership was a dead end does not mean that we don't bust our ass on our end to organize and advocate for Medicare for all. Do our part to make this a popular policy that is undeniably accepted and advocated for the vast majority of all people right? Make it so you can't not have it on the House floor ready for a vote. And if that's taking some time, it takes some time. We have to be prepared for all political pushback from special interest groups who have ties to either the private health insurance companies or the pharmaceutical companies, who will launch as many attack ads necessary on the individuals or the candidates who are promoting Medicare for all to try to tank their own career and find ways to vilify the transition to a single payer system altogether. We have to be prepared for that. Right? But again, just because force the vote was not a winning strategy doesn't mean that we stop advocating for Medicare for all. We can't lose sight of how important it is to continue to fight for it. Oh, God damn it. Can you translate that to English? It was rather stretched. Huh? I was speaking in English. What do you mean? Are you saying to be a little bit more concise? Fight for Medicare for all. The end. Well, that's the whole thing. It's fucked up that it would be political suicide to withhold your vote from an economic recovery package in exchange for a single-payer system that absolutely is absolutely necessary, and to the detriment of hundreds of thousands of people right now who have contracted COVID-19 and will experience some sort of debt incurred from the treatments that will not be covered by their insurance, or maybe they don't have insurance and they have to just go in and seek treatment, and then they will literally most likely go into medical bankruptcy. It's a cruel system. It's a cruel system to think about the risks that are involved with attempting to pull some sort of strategy to get Medicare for all on the House floor right now. Because time is of the essence, and we need to offer everybody the opportunity to go to the doctor and seek treatment free of charge, especially now. But I think it would be woefully ignorant to say that trying to invoke your power as a very small coalition in the Democratic Party right now to go up against vested interests looking to shoot you down could be incredibly dangerous. And I hate that. Because I don't want to lose AOC. I don't want to lose Ilhan Omar. I don't want them to get on a shit list that pushes them so far to the fringes of the Democratic Party that they lose their popularity with their own constituency. I linked a YouTube video and Amy3 watched it for at least like an hour, which made me feel special. Thank you all. You're welcome, Tank Techno. Zenfer, thank you. They've already been on that list. And imagine still sucking up to Nancy Pelosi while doing your best to advocate for the agenda you ardently support, and thinking about what would be the ramifications if you did defy Nancy Pelosi and what she would do in response. I hate that we're doing this. We don't need to do the strategic or scenario planning right now. I still remember what they did to Cynthia McKinney and Dennis Kucinich. Nancy Pelosi has power because she understands the power dynamics of the Democratic Congress. Yeah, she's been climbing the ladder for so long. She's played the game. She's not sitting on top of the Democratic Party for no reason. It's true. Two bits. Thank you for the follow. Luke, thank you so much for resubscribing 5 months in a row. Thank you. Anyone who acknowledges Nancy Pelosi's existence is a neo-lib shill. So about Biden's housing recovery plan. Yes. Hello. Hello. Also, new UK COVID variant may be 30% more deadly, says Boris Johnson. He's Trump with more sheen. Do we think Medicare for All would pass without Pelosi as Speaker? I think it depends on who would be taking Nancy Pelosi's place, because in many ways, I think that the office of the House Speaker is larger, the legacy is larger. It is not necessarily conducive to a person so much as the office itself and the interests that you are meant to uphold as the Speaker of the House. It is not the power of the people. It's not the will of the people. It's not the consensus reached in the Democratic Party itself and with amongst active members of Congress. It is the corporate-backed interest, the donor class. Those are the interests you represent if you are the Speaker of the House of Representatives. It does not matter, I think, who occupies that seat right now. I think that it is so corrupt. Political institutions and their power have corrupted that seat for so long. It'll take a very long time to get a new cohort of representatives to wash away the corruption that is tied to the power dynamics within the Democratic Party. No, I don't think that AOC were the House leader. She would, because she entered politics clean slate. She does not take corporate interest money, no PAC money. She has a different set of standards. She is not beholden to corporate interests. She has made a pledge that she never will. I think that she will make good on that pledge. And I don't think that she would face the same issues as Nancy Pelosi. I think that that is the reason why I believe it's going to take a little bit of time to see a shift in the overarching collective goals and agenda of the National Democratic Party. And I don't know if you can get money out of politics or money out of government, but you can keep money out of campaigns so long as those representatives sitting in these seats don't become corrupt or persuaded by interests that are outside of the purview of their responsibilities in Washington. We know that there is an apparatus at play that does convince active city members of Congress to support or oppose legislation because of the financial incentives that they will receive after they leave Washington, or even while they're in Washington, that will be kind of hush hush. No one has to know about it. Anyway. But she hasn't so far. No, I don't think AOC will. I don't think AOC will. I think that hopefully she will not be corrupted.